Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Actionable Insights from GBG's Global State of Digital Identity 2023 report. My name is Brandy Morton. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing here at Ideology, and I'm joined by our host, Gus Tomlinson, who's the Chief Product Officer for GBG, and Crystal Blythe, who's the Vice President of Fraud for Ideology. Thanks for joining us today. We're really excited to present key findings from GBG's annual research survey about fraud from around the globe. GBG produces this report every year, but this year, for the first time, American consumers and businesses were participating, and we were able to take this opportunity to share new data and key insights to help you better detect and deter fraud. So for slide 2, let's talk about a few housekeeping items to get us started. Please note that all attendees are in listen-only mode. Feel free to submit questions at any time by clicking on questions in the panel on the right side of the screen. We've got a lot of great information to cover today. We'd love for you to check out the full survey report. So everyone who registered is actually going to get a copy of that after the webinar. We'll send that out to the group. There'll be a quick 4-question survey after the session ends. We're definitely committed to providing quality, useful content, so we really appreciate your feedback if you have a few minutes after to give that survey. GBG and Ideology have a wonderful, beautiful relationship. Ideology is part of the GBG family, has been a leading identity verification provider in the Americas for over 2 decades. Our end-to-end solutions cover the entire customer lifecycle and encompass standalone and layered capabilities to address all channels, helping businesses boost revenue, deter fraud, and maintain compliance. So with that, I'm excited to get the webinar kicked off, and I'll hand it over to you, Gus. Thank you.
Hi everybody, as Brandy said, I'm Chief Product Officer for the Identity Fraud Solutions at GBG. I've been here almost 10 years. I absolutely love identity, and in the past kind of few years as GBG's grown, I've loved welcoming Ideology into the GBG business, followed by Acuant, now rebranded under Ideology, because everybody here is pretty nerdy about identity, data, and stopping fraud. I personally love the release of this report every year. We always find out some nuggets. Some things absolutely don't shock us, and I'm sure they won't shock you. But hopefully with the expertise here that we've got today with Crystal, we can talk through some of these and also say, actually, the world might seem pretty scary, but there is definitely some easy, simple ways where we can help all of the businesses and consumers build back a little bit of trust in the digital identity. Crystal, over to you.
Hi everybody, so I'm Crystal Blythe. I've been with Ideology for about 10 years, pretty much running the fraud team, looking at all the fraud that we see and making those recommendations and trying to help catch these fraudsters on a daily basis, and just here to kind of give some insight on what we see and how we can try to help everyone kind of hone in on that, on the fraud that we see and stop these fraudsters.
So what are we going to cover today? If I go to the 3 big topics, first of all, growing crisis in gaining consumer confidence, followed by balancing friction and fraud, and actually how we can bring those together to help with point 1. And then finally as well, a little bit of touch on compliance and how regulations are ever evolving, but actually reacting to them shouldn't be too complicated. So let's dive right in with the growing crisis in gaining consumer confidence. I don't think this should particularly become a shock to everybody that there is a lack of trust that is almost getting more and more emphasis in the online world. If we look at the macro environment, and all of the challenges, if we think about watching the news and everything that comes up as bad news, and then we think about our own day-to-day personal experiences or the conversations we have with our friends and our family, consumers are concerned. So that is a big old stat there. 67% of consumers are worried that personal details are available for sale. My question to the audience and to you, Crystal, is it's probably a bit higher?
Definitely, it's higher. You know, working with fraud and working in the fraud realm, I would probably say most everyone's data has been compromised, and it's out there. It's out there on the dark web, just waiting. And you know, with all the breaches that have gone on throughout the years, you know, there's really no way to kind of stop it unless you put a stop freeze on everything, right? And so, yeah, I think the number is probably a little more around the 80s, 90s, right? It's kind of scary, but at the same time, it's just something that we make sure that we're working on, and we're putting those key things in place to try to prevent, or if it does happen, make some type of changes, make sure we're trying to prevent it, and be more proactive than reactive.
Yeah, I think when it's everybody, we just need to be prepared. A couple of other key stats that we pulled out in the report is that actually over 9 and 10, so 92% of consumers are concerned about falling victim to fraud. And that's the level of concern that I think consumers should have. On the flip side of that, what are consumers doing to actually prevent that? Very little, actually. I sit there as somebody who lives and breathes this industry, and I probably don't do things like change my passwords quickly enough. I do spot for phishing emails, I do a little bit of that, but we're all inherently lazy, and we rely on organizations to do the majority of it for us. So that kind of brings us on to our next bit, though, is, well, yeah, businesses need to act. Half of businesses believe fraud has increased in the past year. What are you seeing, Crystal?
Yeah, businesses need to act. Fraud's definitely increased. We've done some studies on our end, and almost all clients have said that they've seen more fraud and more increase of identity theft, synthetic identity fraud, all types of fraud that's been happening. So while the 49% of businesses believe, I believe it's a lot higher than that. And with me working with a lot of clients, sometimes they're a little weary of letting us know what type of fraud they're seeing or how much fraud we're seeing, but we definitely know that it's a lot higher by looking at the data from day to day.
And I think there's a little bit of a challenge there. So you've got consumers concerned, but a little bit lazy. You've got businesses saying they're seeing it, but actually probably not aware of the full truth. Now, when we put these things together, we constantly spot new types of fraud. We constantly see the rise in fraud attacks. We hear and we see all of that experience from consumers. The challenge is those two things aren't necessarily coming together. So the crisis of trust absolutely sits there. Now, as somebody who's responsible for driving the innovation in our ID and fraud products, I know we're solving these problems. I know our customers who are constantly tweaking how they configure our products and putting in new capabilities, they're the good ones. But that's not everybody. And I think if we look at really taking responsibility and wanting to actually stop what is happening on a day-to-day environment, which is the fact that actually 1 in 7 consumers have been victim of fraud in the past year, we all need to get a little bit better at making sure we stop that. If I take a few examples of fraud, most of them you will all be familiar with, but Crystal, I would love to get your view on what's going on and what simple things actually consumers can do maybe themselves, but definitely that businesses can implement. If we start maybe with synthetic fraud.
Yeah, so with synthetic fraud, it's one of those things that's kind of tricky, right? So on the ideology side, what we're kind of doing here is we're looking for key notes for things, right? So a lot of times when there's synthetic identities, there's a risk of it being someone that's underage, taking that social security number, but then layering it in with a different date of birth. And so what happens is when we're looking at some of that data, we're looking at how long has this identity been in the credit system, right? If we've got somebody that should have been born in 1958 and they're supposedly within the United States, but their profile age is only 2 years. That's a key red flag there, right? So we're taking things like that. We're taking things like social security number, seen across multiple individuals' names and things like that. And we're layering those different ID notes along with other things like an email address that hasn't been seen within the system, but maybe a few months. And we're taking those key things, layering them in to figure out if something is a synthetic identity or not. So there's definitely things that we're looking at on our end to try to catch these type of fraudsters that given with a synthetic identity, a lot of times they're brand new. You don't know. They're not necessarily your, they wouldn't necessarily show up on your credit report because it's a brand new identity that they've created. So those are the key things that we're kind of looking at on our end to try to catch these types of fraud.
And this for me is kind of the bare minimum. If you're working with an identity provider, make sure they read and they understand the data. So don't just say you've got this and you can match it against a reference source. Understand it. One of my favorite things that I've heard the team in Ideology say for a long time is data tells a story. Let's read it, let's understand it, let's interpret it and pass that back. Now, this is kind of a must-have, I think, on any identity transaction. Is just understand, does that look right, does it not? Slightly maybe trickier things, or actually I don't think they are, and I know you'll come with an easy solution, Crystal, but promotion abuse fraud. We're seeing an increase of that. Of course we are. There is an economic downturn. People are ultimately looking to take advantage of those different promotions, whether they be in prepayment cards, in e-commerce, in gambling. What are you seeing and what can we do?
Yeah, so what I notice is a lot of clients or companies are more reactive than proactive with these types of things. What we've seen with fraudsters is they're, as opposed to what we saw maybe 10 years ago. 10 years ago, they wanted quick money. They wanted things very quickly. Now they're willing to wait. We've seen things where people have opened up accounts and they've sat on them for a year, just waiting. They have time to wait now. I don't know if that's part of COVID and people being home more and they didn't have much to do. However, what we're seeing is that they are waiting. So we have to be more proactive with things. We have to make sure that our settings are correct, make sure that we're making, like if you see a trend, if you see a fraud trend where you see maybe an email, maybe an address where multiple accounts are being created, but there's no money being added, there's no money being withdrawn. Some of those things are still red flags. I know that for us, one of our biggest seasons is tax season, right? Tax season comes in January, but what we notice is around this time, around September, October, that's when we see fraud start picking up because people are waiting for tax season to open. So they may start doing these promotions and opening up these prepaid cards and other types of things, but no money's added. So just key things like that and just knowing your industry and knowing what type of fraud to look for.
I think it's really interesting. I think you go on that journey from kind of your opportunistic fraudster of, hey, I'm going to maybe take the opportunity and get this promotion 3 or 4 times to, like you say, actually more the sophisticated fraudster. And that's maybe where we've also seen the industrialization of fraud, which organizations, analysts have talked about for a really long time, but actually it used to be in pockets. Now we're seeing even those opportunistic fraudsters go through a life cycle and become, actually, there is organization to this. You can actually Google, how do I become a sleeper fraudster? How do I create a synthetic ID? This thing has become so accessible to people, but spotting those things early. And I think particularly if I look at some of the things in the Expect ID platform, I think it's awesome that we can start to spot these early and actually proactively reach out to our customers and say, by the way, there's some sleeper fraud here. Do something about it before it actually hurts your business, before it actually hurts your good customers and your brand and your perception. I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we then move on to our second topic of balancing fraud and friction, I always think there's kind of 2 types of friction that exist. There's friendly friction. So how do you make people feel safe? How do you put in the right amount of, actually, you're passing over your social security, your name, your email, all of this information to a company who looks like they're taking it seriously, versus insults friction, where, do you know what, I'm a genuinely good customer. How many more hoops do you want to put me through to let me get my stuff? And that's the balance. And this has actually evolved as technology has evolved. I've seen people going from wanting super, super fast speed, and I think we used to have a balance where actually a higher percentage of our consumers that we surveyed wanted speed over security. That's flipping around now, actually. They want a great user experience. They want to be guided through. They want to embrace all of those things. And we really need to help customers feel safe for our customers by implementing different tactics. So if I start with balancing UX with friction, there we go. 64% of consumers say it's important. Only 32 state that speed is extremely important. Now, for me, I look at this and it's not an either or. You can have both. So how do we help our customers make sure that they feel secure, but also achieve the speed, balancing different things? Crystal, I don't know if you've got a view in terms of how we're doing that today.
Yeah, I think part of it is, of course, everybody wants everything really fast as a consumer, right? That's just how we are, especially in the Americas. Everybody wants everything really, really fast, but they don't want the friction. So definitely there. I think part of it is knowing and finding that balance of what you need to ask the consumer, right? And not over asking for too much information that isn't relevant to what you need. And so, yes, I completely agree. I just think that it's just key in figuring out what data you need to be asking the client, as opposed to just asking for social ID if that's not the specific market that you need. And I think if you find that balance, you'll be able to upload customers a lot faster and not have as much friction.
Great. And I think, again, the next kind of stat absolutely goes back to that. Consumers do believe it's a business's responsibility. We as GBG actually believe it's our responsibility as an identity and technology provider. Make sure that you're helping your consumers by working with providers who treat identity and fraud as one and are solving that. The other bit, which I love, leaning on biometric technology. 10 years ago, when I started working in the identity fraud space, I remember sitting in a strategy meeting saying, gosh, this fingerprint is going to solve all of our problems, isn't it? Why? Because the Apple iPhone, the different kind of smartphones that existed there, they were run by a fingerprint. I don't think we actually sat there at a time and said every consumer would think actually flashing my face up on my phone is going to be part of our day-to-day routine 10, 15, 20 times a day. Mobile technology, I think, has put trust in biometrics. Also, the sophistication of that behind it has meant that we have an extra defense and a layer of improving the security of online accounts. Crystal, what's your view in terms of how we can bring biometrics into journeys?
Yeah, I think that biometrics is great, right? And I think that for pretty much everyone's using an iPhone, right? We live on our smartphones. So I definitely think that that is a journey that needs to happen, especially when we have our younger generation, our younger demographics that may not have any type of credit history, right? But we want to upload them. If we're asking them these questions and they don't have any type of credit history, or they don't have any type of public record, how are we going to verify them, right? So I think that that's key there. I think that where it does become tricky a little bit is sometimes for our older generation, right, that aren't so used to the smartphones and things like that. But for the most part, I think it's key in finding people that are new in country, people that are of a younger demographic. I think it works great. And then, of course, what we want to use it for is to deter fraudsters. It's a great deterrent. So if someone's trying to register for something online and they get to a certain point and they say, okay, like take a picture, let's scan something. A lot of times that is a great deterrent. And a lot of times that will push fraudsters away from even wanting to complete the registration.
Absolutely agree. I think it's, I also look and kind of sit at the sophistication curve of fraudsters, going back to that opportunistic fraudster. Actually simply having a biometric step, to your point, Crystal, it'll put them off. They don't want to show their face. Now, that is probably a big chunk of fraud. We also do have the most sophisticated types of fraud. And if I look at the speed at which we're releasing machine learning models that help us spot those in a onboarding environment that is very much document and biometric led, we have to be on top of our game. We have to support that, because it is, you said it, Crystal, it's a cat and mouse game, and it's staying ahead of those fraudsters and doing it. So let's lean on biometric technology for that friendly friction in terms of creating a good environment. If it's a high stakes purchase, if it's the opening of a bank account, taking out a loan, our customers, we know, want to feel safe. And let's make sure that we use the technology appropriately to give them that experience, but also back it up with expertise in the models that sit behind it. Okay, we are on to our third topic, compliance in a new era of regulations, and how we all love compliance. We could probably speak a lot actually around biometric compliance, having just ended on that topic, but instead we're going to focus on the Inform Act first of all. Recently, we've worked with a number of our different customers to say how can we help support them with the Inform Act. At a high level, it's asking marketplaces to actually up their game. We all trust in buying stuff from these marketplaces. Actually, they've got a responsibility to make sure that those transactions are seamless, and that the people that we're buying from are good, and that we can put even more trust in the digital economy of selling. That means collecting a few more different pieces of information at the right point, verifying more information, and having super good data quality and making sure that actually on an ongoing basis we know who they are, and also understanding the different transactions. Crystal, I don't know if you've got anything to add in terms of how we can help and react to those different regulation changes.
Yeah, I think that for the most part, at a high level, if I was the consumer and, I would want to make sure that that information was verified through the company. But, with the Inform Act, I think that it's just one of those new things that we've just got to get on board with the online marketplaces, and just making sure that, as a consumer, but also as a company, that you prevent those steep financial penalties. Absolutely.
I think the next element that we talk about is really important as well. Transparency is key. I know, I can tell you a bit about, I've got a mother who absolutely loves crafting. Every Christmas she goes, she sits, she sells all of the different things that she's made each year. Now, anybody walking up to her stall has absolute trust. I flip that to some of our biggest, most known marketplaces who have a million different people who are exactly like my mum selling things every day. How do we create that trust? How do you do it? Ultimately, transparency is key. And that's the goal of this act. It's to make sure that there is more transparency to online transactions. We don't have any more impact on that trust online. Actually, identity verification, again, is critical to that. If I look at monitoring transactions, understanding payment flows, that is all critical and we need to look at it, but it starts with a solid identity verification. And that identity verification starts with understanding, can you trust that individual? Identity and fraud absolutely has to come together. And by putting in these rigorous methods at the start and also in the lifetime, we're going to make sure that marketplaces become something that continue to be a trusted form of our economy moving forward. So, takeaways. Amplify and diversify your fraud intelligence with a consortium fraud network. Crystal, what is the value of a consortium fraud network?
Yeah, I think that the value of the consortium fraud network is probably endless. So, with us, what we're doing with the consortium is people are sharing what fraud they found, and we're able to basically share that information with other clients that have opted in to say, okay, this email address has been associated with fraud. This street address has been associated with fraud, or this specific social security number has been associated with fraud. And you're able to take that, go back, do your own due diligence, and dig in to see if you're able to find any type of fraud rings that are trying to penetrate your system, and try to stay on top of it. I think some of the biggest trends that we've been able to find is almost always from collaboration from other clients trying to work together. Of course, it's a competitive market. Some industries overlap, but we have a lot of clients that are within the same industry. I think the biggest part here is the fact that we know that there's fraud out there. How can we combat it? We can't combat it without working together. And that's why the fraud, the consortium and the fraud network is so important.
Wow. I couldn't agree more. I also love as well that fraudsters don't stay in their lane. Fraudsters will take advantage in a gambling sector, in a financial sector, in a retail sector. And for me as well, the diversity of the consortium also does actually make those results better. We need to get better at cross collaboration. And actually, if you as customers don't want to do it, GBG will take care of it for you. But there is huge amounts of value of actually spotting that across the different verticals. Separate, multi-layered. An identity for me isn't a name, address, social security number. I said it earlier, I'll say it again. As human beings, we have a digital footprint. That means there is lots of different ways that we can understand and build trust. Crystal, how do you advise customers to build up that multi-layered protection strategy?
I always tell clients, send me everything you have, right? Send me all of your data that you're collecting on someone. So yes, name, address, date of birth, but I think where we're finding most of the fraud these days is going to be around email, IP address, and things of that nature. There's always something that the fraudster is going to slip up on. And typically it's them creating a disposable email, right? If there's disposable emails or domains coming through, let's just block them, right? Why is somebody setting up a new bank account and they're using a disposable domain? So there's always something there. So I always tell them, like, send me everything and let's see what happens. Let's see what data we find. And then when we do find the fraudulent data, let's put things in place. If we see a lot of fraud that's going around your email, let's use our email product, right? So that we can stop that and be proactive instead of being reactive. Because by the time they've already set something up, maybe they've already created an account and moved some money somewhere. So, I think those are key things there. Just figuring out, making sure we're getting all the data that we can, and then figuring out where the fraud is, and then also putting those key products in place to try to stop it before it happens.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other bit that customers often think is, God, you put more things, it's just going to keep costing me more and more and more and more and more. The beauty, I think, of having that multi-layered view actually on top of the consortium as well is the ability to react. So actually, let's bring email higher up the stack. We know that it is stopping an awful lot of fraud that's going on. If we look at this demographic, let's have this approach, etc. For me, it's a multi-layered approach that you don't build once. You react to it, you change to it, you lean on experts, whether they be in your vendor or in your own business, and make sure that whatever you're doing, again, balances that friction fraud piece, but fundamentally protecting you and your business. Because otherwise, your brand will take a hit. And that is far more costly than not making sure you invest the time to actually get this right at the first point.
Absolutely.
And then lastly, implement a compliance workflow that's easy to configure. So Crystal, I'm going to lean on a fraud expert here for a little bit of compliance bit, but it's simple, right? Changing workflows, adding things in, it's easy, and it should be easy from vendors.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, you want to make sure that you're staying within regulation for things, but it's easy, right? We make our product easy to be able to go in and make those key settings and those changes with one touch of a button, right? So while there are a ton of things that we can do, we also want to make sure that we're talking to the client and making sure we're staying within those compliance regulations, and talking to them about what they can do and what they should do. Of course, and what they shouldn't do.
Absolutely. And then lastly, act now, speak with a trust expert. We're going to have our Q&A where you can definitely pick the brains of myself and Crystal. But I've spotted a few of our customers have joined this. If you haven't spoken to Crystal's team in the past couple of months, make sure you reach out and you get that information back, because ultimately, if you go back to GBG, our mission and purpose is to create trust in a digital world. That's what we get up every morning to do. And that's absolutely what Crystal's team is equipped to help with the Americas. So make sure following this, you do reach out and you do act, because we are absolutely here to help. Brandy, I think you are going to step back in for the Q&A session.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Gus, Crystal. That was great information. Really appreciate your time. And we have had a lot of questions come in. If you do have a question, please feel free to click questions on the right panel on the right side of the screen. And so for the first question, I think this one, I'll send this one to you, Gus, and then Crystal, if you wanted to add. Someone asked, with so many IDs being compromised, how does a vendor truly know who their customer is? What sort of ID checking and validation is being employed to make sure that person X is truly person X?
So, I mean, and it is the big challenge. I think there's two challenges, actually. How do you know that that person truly is that person? And also, how do you know that that person is a real person? The first one is often what you hear about quicker, because an individual is impacted, they complain, and the loop closes. So if somebody is impersonating another individual, you find out about it. Now it goes back to making sure you understand the data, making sure you layer those things, and you put in as many defenses as possible. And it is not a game where you will stop 100% of fraud. To stop 100% of fraud, you'll have 0 customers. That's something I always say. Let's not give expectations that are false. However, you can make sure that you've got that optimal risk appetite, and you're doing the best by layering in what Crystal said in terms of email, IP, reading the data, putting in some biometrics, and it's all a risk-based approach. The other bit's a little bit harder. Those identities that aren't real identities, to Crystal's point, they can sleep there for ages. If you're a customer that has got a tax season coming up, be aware, do a refresh of your data. Don't get lazy, don't get complacent. Just doing something once is not enough. Make sure you continue to understand that data, and maybe wash data again, go back. I've got a couple of things that I always find entirely unacceptable. At the top of the list is onboarding and working with dead people. Nobody should ever do that. There is easy measures to prevent it. And I think that actually at the point of onboarding, check that that person's not dead. In the life cycle, check that they're not dead. Do these things. It's common sense, but often we forget common sense. And I'd really encourage everybody to say, actually, are there really simple, basic things that we're just not doing? I'm not very good at short answers, sorry.
Crystal, anything you'd like to add? That was good.
I think Gus covered it all. Definitely do not work with dead people. That's a big no, right? Yeah, I think she covered it all. You know, trying to make sure the person is who they say they are. I think part of that is making sure you collect the right data, right? You've got to collect the data. You've got to collect a lot of data. Mostly everybody's first name, last name, address. That's all. We can Google that. That's basic things that can be Googled. So you want to make sure that you're pulling in the right data, the machine, where the machine is, the IP address, email address. Those are things that have to be created, right? And so we can look to see when it was created, if it's been associated with fraud, if that IP, if someone is supposed to be in California and their IP address is a fixed IP address and it's in Georgia, that's a red flag. Those are things that we should be looking at.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question is, are there specific fraud threats that are more prevalent in the US compared to other countries?
Yes, that's for me, maybe. I would say synthetic fraud is probably soaring right now. That's one of the big things, and I think people have a hard time. They either don't understand what synthetic identity fraud is, and they don't know how to handle it, is the second thing. I know I've talked to multiple clients, and some of them just have no idea, and others are just asking, like, how do we combat this? What do we need to be looking for? And part of that is some clients just aren't sending us enough information for us to be able to get those pinpoint those specific things, and just kind of educating people on what to look for.
You've got the gift of the social security number, and it's funny, it's been rampant in the US, synthetic fraud. I actually speak to a couple of our colleagues regularly around this. We don't see the problem very much in Australia. We're starting to see it more so in the UK, although it takes a slightly different shape because we don't necessarily have them. When we speak to customers, you're seeing exactly the same challenges when we look at India with the Aadhaar register, which had massive data breaches. You look at places and some of the markets in Latin America, wherever that is, that single PIN number that people actually take and hold on to and use, it's a really, really easy way for people to start building those synthetic identities. And I think the good thing is, crack it in the US, actually the ways of spotting it and solving it in other countries is exactly the same. To Crystal's point earlier, if you've got somebody who's 35 and actually they've only got a year's worth of a footprint on a bureau, that's a little bit suspicious. So it's there, it exists, but for anybody who is outside of the US, learn from the US.
Thank you. Our next question is, whereas Apple seems to be very secure, seems to have a very secure core and Android is more open, how can we ascertain a person's biometric information hasn't been stolen?
Oh, that's a very, very good question. I wish I had David Thomas, who is our head of documents and biometrics, on the call, but don't necessarily. The biggest challenge that we're seeing at the moment is injection attack. Where actually within that onboarding profile, after we've scanned a document and then looked at biometrics, somebody is injecting a different biometric, and that's how people are coming and getting around to it. The reaction to that is actually implementing really, really good machine learning models and stopping that fraud along the way. Also, it's a bigger question in terms of how do we start to release more either digital driver's licenses, how do we start to use NFC chips that actually have got better control over the data. So we looked at ourselves to solve that problem. We also looked at governments around the world to make sure that the document data that is held centrally is more accessible so that it becomes a safer journey for all too.
Okay, biometrics is very popular. We have another question. How safe are biometric solutions? Consumers believe them to be safe, but do they really offer greater security?
Simply, yeah. They do. They add in an extra layer. Everything that's a layer will add extra security. And again, I go to that sophistication of a fraudster. And I look at back in the olden days when biometric technology was out there, and somebody used to be able to put up a fake sign, and I could be Kate Middleton or Meghan Markle behind, and I could do that, and actually the software couldn't pick it up. The days of that have gone. Our next challenge is deep fakes and the leveraging of AI in terms of that. Now, again, we need to continue to battle fraudsters, but let's make sure we stop the easy fraud. Sometimes if you've got the most sophisticated fraud example in the world and that gets through, I don't judge our customers. If they've got basic fraud that they're letting through, that's not acceptable, and we need to make sure that actually customers are putting in the protections to make it.
Next, someone asked, should financial institutions create, store, and save synthetic profiles as part of their data models?
Ooh, Crystal, I'm going to give that to you.
Should they create, can you repeat that question for me, Brandy?
Sure. Should financial institutions create, store, and save synthetic profiles as part of their data models?
Listen, I am a true believer. The more profiles or the more data that you have to try to be preventive and proactive, the better. You know, we have some machine learning on our end, and part of that is what we've already seen before, right? So if we've already seen fraud come through before, if we've already seen fake IDs come before, we're creating those models and that machine learning to help us catch it. Because if you don't have those types of models, how are you going to know what you're looking for? So while I'm not big on housing a lot of data, I think that in some cases you will need that in order to be able to be preventive and proactive.
Okay, and the next question is, can you provide more insight into how businesses can reduce friction in the onboarding process? And then we talked a lot about when to put in the friendly friction. I think this person's asking to understand when to reduce it, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a really wicked UX team, actually, that constantly do reviews of some of our customers' journeys to make sure. So if I start with that point, make the journey as clear and as concise as possible and guide people through. That is often the easiest thing, because actually taking somebody and explaining why you're doing certain things is really, really important. Then if we look at the tech and the choices, we are just about to release, for example, our latest SDK for document capture. That takes it down to fractions of seconds of capturing that document, and it does all of the hard work for a customer. Why should you have to sit there and hold your mobile over a document and say, oh, it's too blurry, oh, the lighting wasn't right, oh, you didn't capture the edges? Take it away, do that hard work for them. So capture smart and make sure that you've got that experience, and then balance that friction. So Crystal spends a lot of time looking at people's data and saying, actually, if you just put this in behind the scenes, you'd get an improvement. And it's our job, I think, as experts to say what will be friction, and actually what can you do behind the scenes to make sure that you can be less worried and you can go into onboarding individuals with confidence.
Yeah, and I also think it's knowing your customer, right? And knowing which ones are low risk, which ones are higher risk. Why would you send someone through that's a lower risk client and make them give you all of their information plus scan an ID, right? Those are the customers that are probably going to get more frustrated, or the ones that maybe they're not. Maybe in some cases you may have a client that's like a consumer that's like, hey, they're asking me all of my information. They're making sure that everything is secure. So I think part of it is just knowing your consumers. We have a lot of clients that have different enterprises that they send certain consumers through. If they know that this is someone that's been registered with them for 5 years, then they're going to be lower risk. So they may just ask them a couple of questions, as opposed to someone that is trying to purchase something that's a high dollar amount and they're brand new. They may say, okay, we're going to send them through these parameters. We're going to make sure we ask them these questions. And then if they get these questions wrong, we're going to ask for an ID. So I think it's part of knowing the workflow and knowing which consumers should be sent where.
Awesome. Well, that concludes all the questions. Thank you, ladies, for those great answers. Perfect.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. I'm going to flash back up here the takeaways and recommendations again. Please amplify and diversify your fraud intelligence, leverage consortiums, and also leverage experts. That's what we come to work to do, and we're here to help. Build up multi-layered fraud prevention to those points, step up when possible, but exactly to Crystal's bit, know your customer, know where there's fraud, and make sure you do that appropriately. Make sure you've got workflows that can react quickly to compliance, whether that actually be the US or globally. And lastly, it is a genuine pledge. Act now, speak with a trust expert today. We absolutely want to help solve these problems and make it a simpler and safer world for us all to exist in. Thank you so much. Website details here. I'm sure the team will be following up because they promised with all of the content and the report. And again, thank you everybody for joining. We really appreciate it, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.